Raheem Morris is the glue that held the Rams together these last few years. How will that glue elevate the Atlanta Falcons?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka Sirius Black, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka Mr. aka, and I appreciate each and every one of you guys that is an everydayer of this pod. And all you got to do to check it out as your first listen or first watch of the day, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we are joined by Jourdan Rodrigue of The Athletic, who covers the Los Angeles Rams, and she's going to speak with us about Zac Robinson's role in getting Baker Mayfield and Carson Wentz up to speed and sort of what that tells us about the Falcons' potential quarterback preferences this offseason. But we'll start things with talking to her about how Raheem Morris was kind of the glue that held things together for Sean McVay these last 2 years with the Los Angeles Rams. And we'll get into that conversation right now. All right, everyone, we are back with an illustrious guest. She is Jourdan Rodrigue, who covers the Rams for The Athletic, and she is here with us to talk about, of course, the former Rams coaches like Raheem Morris and Zac Robinson, who are now new Falcons coaches. Jourdan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Any chance I can get to talk about those guys, great people, great coaches, I will definitely take it. So I appreciate you thinking of me.
Well, I want to start talking about Raheem, the new Falcons head coach, and I want to talk a little bit about his role, especially the last 2 years with the Rams. We know his first year, he was the DC. They won a Super Bowl. He had a big impact on that. But the last 2 years, the Rams have kind of gone through it in the wake of winning that Super Bowl. And I'm just curious to ask you, like, did Raheem Morris kind of save Sean McVay when it comes to sort of burnout the last couple of years? So I'm just curious to pick your brain on that, because from what I've heard, Sean McVay was going through some things the last couple of years, and Raheem was kind of the rock that sort of held things together there. But is that sort of a true statement?
Yeah, and you have to remember the two are longtime best friends, not just coaching colleagues. And I think Sean trusts Raheem he'd trust him with his life, frankly. And in 2022, the Rams' crash post Super Bowl was significant from a team perspective, but also from a cultural perspective and from a personal perspective, because, they were fragmented in the locker room because of the injuries they went through. But then Sean McVay was also dealing with some personal struggles, burnout, and even stepped away from play calling at one point. And during that time, Raheem Morris really took over a lot of the locker room cohesiveness. I had heard at one point that offensive linemen were watching film in his office with him to kind of just get that feeling of what it's like to be around him, a really positive person and somebody who was always checking on people. And I think somebody who really helped Sean McVay come back to himself a little bit. Sean will say this, and he has said this before, Raheem Morris has never had a bad day. And he's been through a lot of stuff in his life too, a lot of adversity, and his perspective and also his genuine care for Sean, but also for everybody in that building really kept this culture from completely falling off a cliff, which between the injuries and how much of a struggle 2022 was, looked a little bit dicey there for a minute. And Sean McVay was extremely burned out. But Raheem will always tell me, and has always told me, that he never truly felt like Sean would step away for good because he loves it too much. And that was something that he kept communicating with Sean is, go back to your why, go back to your fundamentals, be a coach. And also I think showed an example of how to do that. And then coming into 2023, the Rams basically said, hey, Raheem, we're going to have to make your defense the sacrificial lamb of this rebuilding effort, because they were going to do a sprint rebuild. They were all convinced from the jump. From the outside, you heard a lot of chatter, oh, the Rams tanking, whatever. But from the inside, and I wrote about this a lot at The Athletic, they felt like they could really achieve a sprint rebuild because of the caliber of coaching, because Sean McVay had really returned back to himself in a positive way and was back in his fundamentals and values as a coach. And because they felt like they could nail this draft, but they needed good teachers. And especially on the defensive side, they totally stripped their defense for the sake of their salary cap to clear all of their dead money in 1 year and to also get younger and replenish that side of the ball for the long term. And they did it. And a huge part of that was because of Raheem Morris's leadership and because of his coaching ability, his teaching ability, his ability to bring his entire staff with him, as well as help the players understand what exactly was expected of them and to encourage them along the way. It was not pretty. It was not easy. The work that went in by that entire coaching staff. And I think with Raheem as the blueprint model of how to do that for everyone, including for Sean McVay, was really significant in achieving that sprint rebuild. And now we're talking about the Rams again as perennially solid team because of that effort that they put in, led by him.
Okay. So I'm just curious, maybe to pick your brain on this, sort of what you've seen from Raheem the last couple of years in LA. Sort of what do you think is maybe one aspect that at least Falcon fans can sort of look at that and say, okay, this can work for us here in Atlanta?
Yeah, when I think of him schematically, Raheem took over this Fangio system that they had installed in 2020. It was, under Brandon Staley, and he molded and adjusted it to continue to evolve it forward and to move it and shape it in different ways. It wasn't just going to be following someone else's rules, following someone else's playbook for the next 2 seasons. And especially it was going to have to depend on some of the personnel. Such a dramatic change in personnel from 2021 to 2022 into 2023. I don't think I challenge listeners, go look at the Rams 2021 and 2022 defensive roster and circle all the names you recognize. And then go look at the 2023 roster at the beginning of the season and circle out, you probably recognize some names now because of the coaching job they did, but go circle the names on that roster. And it was, they went from the richest defense in the league or the most cost heavy to the most cost effective or the cheapest. And so when I think about Raheem and what Atlanta Falcons fans certainly can expect from him, we've talked about the cultural impact in terms of how he conducts meetings and how he'll hold the team together and the presence that he has. But the schematic stuff is really interesting because I think of adjustments. The Rams defense, the no-name defense that they were called through most of the year, they pitched 5 half shutouts, whether it was adjusting for a shutout in the first half after allowing an initial score on the opening drive, or whether it was second half shutouts. They pitched 5 of those shutouts through the course of the regular season, including, against some significant opponents. And this is because of the adjustments. This is because of the way that there's a constant communication and collaboration between the coaches and Raheem Morris and between the players. And there's a constant buy-in and there's an understanding. One time against the Baltimore Ravens, there was a play where a tight end was wide open down the left side and it was a score. And Raheem Morris immediately walked over to the group of DBs who were all kind of looking at each other like, who was that? Whose was that? And Raheem said, that was my call. It was a, what call. And, and I won't make that call again. And so taking that ownership and that autonomy and turning that into autonomy for his players and turning that into empowerment, that's a huge key element of adjustments, not just the schematic know-how and the knowledge that I don't think people talk enough about. And that was one of the reasons why half over half, this turned out to be a pretty respectable defense.
Yeah, I think, obviously I didn't watch nearly as much Rams as you did, but watching the last couple of postseason appearances, it did feel like in each one of those games, they might have given up some things in the first half, but they seemed to make those, in-game adjustments. And, in the second half of those games, the defense was able to get the necessary stops to get the offense back in the game. And you saw that in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago where they actually won that game. And unfortunately, I don't think they were able to pull it off this past year against the Lions. But yeah, certainly I think adjustments are sort of, to me, the thing that sort of stood out about Raheem Morris's defense over these last couple of years.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like you look at the overall way that the scheme has developed too, it's met the moment with the players, but also collaborated with the offensive side. One reason why Sean McVay wanted this scheme is because if you ran it in a certain way, it could really complement and be complemented by an offense that scored a lot of points. And in 2022, they had a plan to be incredibly complementary in that way. I don't mean just complementary football, the cliche that we always hear, but truly the way that they played defense would be amplified by a team that scored a lot of points. And it would help the offense go, if the offense could sustain drives, would help that offense go ball control, as well as continue that, that ball control mentality on the defensive side. Well, the Rams in 2022 went 3 and out at a 40% rate, which is one of the worst in the league and the worst of the Sean McVay era. And like I said, it was a really hard year for everybody. So coming into 2023, even though Raheem had some of the youngest personnel in the NFL and super inexperienced DBs in every, safeties, corners, and then also no pass rush other than the GOAT, Aaron Donald, to start the year. And that's not to disrespect. A couple of young players really came along, but at the beginning of the year, it was scary looking out there. And so, but instead of you seeing them continue that sort of deep zone shell that drove people crazy in 2022, again, because the defense was trying to not give up explosives because the offense could not freaking score on the other side for the first time under Sean. So it was like, I can't even talk about it. It was insane. And so on the, you come into camp in 2023 and you're like, okay, back to the zone shell. Cool. Going to see this because they're trying to protect the young players and helping them play a little bit with, some cushion. And no, they were pressing. They were in this like crazy cool cover 3 stuff that was like really match zone. And it looked a lot like 2020, except different coverage contours in the back half. Their quarters looked more aggressive. All of the types of things that they were doing in camp that year totally put the idea of, protecting these young players on their heads. Instead, he was going to challenge them. He was going to make them back into an aggressive group. And even though this group made some mistakes and was bumpy along the way, and again, it's really struggled from a lack of a cohesive pass rush from the first part to the second part of the rush, they were more aggressive and they played their butts off and they made plays on the ball like they hadn't in 2022.
Okay. Well, you talk about complementary football. I do want to talk about the offensive side of the ball, where Zac Robinson reigns supreme. And we'll get into that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons here with Jourdan Rodrigue of The Athletic. Now, football season is over, which means basketball season is heating up. And that means you can get buckets with your first bet at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. And you can bet on NBA, and especially now in the wonderful month of March, you can bet on NCAA teams and players. You can do quick bets and live same game parlays and exclusive player props, right? You love those player props, especially when we get to April, when it comes to the NFL draft. So go check those out. And all you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So continuing today's episode with Jourdan Rodrigue of The Athletic, let's talk a little bit about the sort of point man on the offensive side of the ball for the Falcons in former Rams assistant coach Zac Robinson, who's now the Falcons offensive coordinator. And I use the term point man because I've read some of your stuff in the past, Jourdan, about how Zac Robinson seemingly was kind of the point man to sort of get guys like Baker Mayfield and Carson Wentz up to speed. So I'll just let you sort of elaborate on how that sort of went down the last couple of years.
Yeah. So as people who have maybe even from afar watched the Rams over the last couple of years or been aware of some of the transactions they've made, they've sort of turned into like a quarterback reset launch pad, right? So like these veteran quarterbacks will just roll right through, spend some time with Zac Robinson, and then like be prepared to like reemerge into society, right? And so that's what they've done with Baker Mayfield. Obviously, huge kudos to Baker for what he accomplished in Tampa Bay. And then Carson Wentz, who was, able to win against the 49ers, which anyone in the NFC West knows. It doesn't matter that there are backups in the game. Doesn't matter that Sean wasn't calling the game and Kyle wasn't really calling the game. That's a big deal for Rams fans anytime they can beat the 49ers in the regular season. But Zac Robinson, what I think people do, and I'm not trying to take credit from anybody, but I think what people do is they say, oh, go partner with Sean McVay and go be in that system, and then you'll be fixed. It'll be fine. And that's actually not what happens, because Sean, as an offensive head coach, is not actually really working with the backup quarterbacks or the second or third guys, or even during the week is not really completely immersive with whoever the starter is, because he's had Matthew Stafford, and Matthew Stafford does not need a lot of help in installing the plan through the week and collaborating with coaches. But also he's game planning. He's the offensive coach and he's the play caller. So he's game planning with coaches and communicating that plan to players. Well, what Zac does, so Zac's role became pretty prominent because once Baker Mayfield comes into the building on a Tuesday, goes and wins a game on a Thursday, it was directly Zac Robinson's job to take a massive amount of complex information and condense it down into, 30 plays that they were going to run on that Thursday, and help Baker feel like he was so assimilated into that in a short amount of time to where he could go out and play free, which is very much what happened on that Thursday. That was one of the most fun games I've ever covered, that last come from behind scoring drive. I think it shocked a lot of people, because it was not just that Baker was sort of down and out on his quarterback luck at that point, but it was, the time between having to onboard a player and start teaching all of the base language, all of the schematic stuff, but also install a game plan at the same time. That was when a lot of coaches internally, but also across the league, started to look at Zac a little bit different. They started to say, okay, this guy can teach. If he has, a core philosophy and a fundamental plan, he can communicate that very, very well. And he makes quarterbacks believe in themselves. And I think that that's part of like the way he is. But you've heard stories in the past, and it even happened at times in LA, of quarterbacks losing confidence and quarterbacks sort of starting out and everything's full of promise, and then they hit adversity, and then the lack of confidence compounds, and then the coaches get upset, and you hear that all the time. But with Zac has always been this really steady presence for those quarterbacks. And Carson Wentz, when he comes in this year, that's the guy he spent the most time with. And whenever I would talk to Carson in the locker room, he would be so complimentary of Zac because of how much extra time Zac was willing to spend with him to understand it, to get it right. Because Carson wasn't just there to maybe come in a game and try to win it if he could. Carson was there to reset his career. And Carson was there to really reset his ability and his experience as a quarterback and turn it into something positive for down the road for himself and his family. And so him and Zac, he spent as much extra time as he possibly could with Zac, understanding that Zac was and is such a great teacher and somebody who would take that extra time and do whatever it took to make sure that that player felt comfortable with what he was supposed to do.
So we have more to come on today's episode, guys, with Jourdan Rodrigue talking about, whether or not Zac Robinson's experience working with some of these veteran quarterbacks in LA is going to lead him to working with some veteran quarterbacks here in Atlanta, or, is he going to look for a reclamation project that maybe a couple of names out there on the market that you would consider as such, or does that lead the Falcons into drafting a rookie? So we'll get into that conversation with Jourdan Rodrigue to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Passion, drive, and patience, it's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. because with eBay Motors, baby, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Now, I know this is not your area of expertise, but for the last several weeks, the debate has raged in Atlanta about who is going to be the next quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons.
Oh, I could tell you 4 perfect fits right now, knowing Zach. No, then it's going to be aggregated, and then it'll be no. I don't want any of that. So,
no. I'm curious. Zach has worked with a lot of veteran quarterbacks in LA. But you sort of just described someone who sounds like if maybe a quarterback is things have not gone their way the last couple of years, and there may be a couple of guys out there that may be available this offseason, that if you're looking for a resurrected sort of career, Zach seems like a guy that could do that, as well as, you're talking about teaching, that's exactly what you want for a young quarterback. So I'm just curious to pick your brain. I know you're not expected to have the correct answer, but if you had to weigh in on that in terms of a direction that makes sense for a Zac Robinson led offense, do you go the veteran route? Do you go the reclamation project, or maybe do you go the rookie?
I would love to see Zach and Raheem both, because Raheem has a lot of experience on the offensive side too. I would love to see both of them start from scratch, so to speak. These are NFL players, but with a rookie quarterback. I would personally love to see that, because I like to see that teaching process. And I think they could do a very good job with that. The one thing, though, that keeps sticking in my ear that I heard Raheem say, I think I've heard Zach say it on the various channels in which he's been interviewed in Atlanta, and it's come across from press conferences that the Falcons have done, is that they think the rest of this roster is capable of contending or for making a deep push now, other than the quarterback. And I got to tell you, Raheem Morris and Zac Robinson have been on a couple Rams rosters that were exactly in that place. And at that point, when the Rams truly understood that they were ready and they could really launch into contention, believing they needed to take one position, a premier position, in this case, quarterback, and turn it from, a medium letter grade to a high letter grade, and that would push them into that next tier of contention. They went out and did it. And so I gotta warn Falcons fans, that's a real life experience. And I say warn, this could be really fun, honestly. But that is a real life experience that both of those guys have. They understand not just going to make the move itself, but all of the ecosystemic balance that has to then happen around it, how you have to nail your drafts in the middle rounds, especially the 3rd and 4th rounders and 5th rounders for the next couple of years. If you make a move like that, if it means it's a trade, and what the ecosystem has to look like if a veteran quarterback is going to enter the building and play at a high level. So I think they understand the entire range of that. But at the same time, to me, that makes a lot of sense. At the same time, you think about who's available, what does it cost, those kinds of things. And further, though, you think about, Zach really starting his offensive coordinating career, alongside somebody who he could really share that bond with and really develop, and they could develop together. There's something enticing about that too. So I know that there's a lot of different directions that this could go. I will say that language was sticking in my ear quite a bit through this combine and through watching them on board in Atlanta. So I would certainly not rule a veteran acquisition out one bit. I just think it'd be really cool to see Zach work with a young guy.
Okay. Well, we will revisit those statements in probably a week and a half if the Falcons go the veteran route or the trade route.
I will say one more thing. I think just because I've covered the Shanahan tree for quite some time now, I do think it would be hilarious. I know this is buzzy. I'm not trying to feed the buzz or whatever. I'm not saying anything definitive. Okay. So nobody quote me on this, okay. But I do think it would be absolutely hilarious if the quarterback who objectively, I think he's a good player. It'd be hilarious if the quarterback who allegedly, Kyle and Sean and Matt have all opined over for years, the Kirk Cousins of it all. I think it'd be hilarious if it was the most under the radar Shanahan McVay disciple is the one that actually ends up working with him. I do think there's like some universal like juiciness out of all of that, right? And you see Kyle kind of looking over his shoulder. No, I'm just kidding. He wouldn't do that. But no, it would be. Either way, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And honestly, when you have a coordinator like Zac and a head coach like Raheem, who's going to empower Zac to do his job, a range of possibilities can work because of the caliber of coaches that you have on that staff and the decision making. You obviously got to pick the right person. The decision making that goes behind it.
Okay. Well, we'll see what the Falcons do at the quarterback position, but Jourdan, I really appreciate you sharing your insight into these two decision makers, and we'll see, we'll be able, the hindsight is 2020, so we'll be able to be like, oh, of course, it made all the sense in the world that they went in this direction based off of that. But, while we're sort of looking ahead, we're just like, I have no idea what's going to happen. So, Jourdan, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight. Let the people know sort of some of the stuff that you're working on at The Athletic. And I also want to say, great work on the Play Callers podcast?
Play Callers, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I
always confuse playmakers or play callers.
I know, I get that a lot. Yeah, I get that a lot, and I just roll right past it because I take the compliment. But yeah, thank you so much. That was awesome to work on. Very arduous to work on, but it was awesome. So I cover the Rams, and I work on NFL projects for The Athletic. A lot of that work somehow has evolved into coverage of the Shanahan tree or the Shanahan McVay tree, the Bill Walsh tree, those types of things. So always cooking up something. You guys can follow me on Twitter. I'm not on there a lot, but you can definitely find all my musings and projects over at theathletic.com.
So guys, that's going to do it for us here on Locked On Falcons. Really appreciate Jourdan Rodrigue for giving us her time to get some insights, especially when it comes to the quarterback conversation. Obviously, you could see it going down any one of those paths, and that's the beautiful part of this time of the offseason. I know people are very passionate about what direction they think the Falcons should go, but they could go any number of directions. I just continue to suggest to people keep an open mind when it comes to this stuff. So we'll see what direction the Falcons go. For your first listen tomorrow on Locked On Falcons, we'll see what we get into. We're kind of waiting for the Falcons to make their cuts. We've already seen some cuts from around the league. So maybe we discuss some of those guys that are now available that could make sense for the Atlanta Falcons, and especially in a world where, the Falcons are spending money, signing cut players. We'll get into it on tomorrow's episode. So without further ado, let's wrap up today. And I want to plug the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel here on YouTube. That is, of course, Locked On Sports Today, also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. So check that out to get all the coverage of all the major sports stories from across multiple leagues and national shows. And of course, if you're looking for more local flavor, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well. So check that out. Check out Locked On NFL Draft, Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. Both are your great companion shows for the offseason. Keith and Dame on Locked On NFL Draft will have you covered for all the things going on leading up for the next 7 weeks leading up to the draft. And of course, Joe and Kyle on Locked On NFL Scouting are great offseason content, talking free agency, talking team building, talking the draft. So, so an all-encompassing offseason team building podcast. So check those out as your second, third listens. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Sports Today, Locked On NFL. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, guys. Your team every day.